The Cree are one of the largest groups of First Nations in North America, with over 200,000 members living in Canada. The major proportion of Cree in Canada live north and west of Lake Superior, in Ontario, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta and the Northwest Territories. About 38,000 live in Quebec. In the United States, this Algonquin-speaking people historically lived from Lake Superior westward. Today, they live mostly in Montana, where they share a reservation with the Ojibwa. The documented westward migration over time has been strongly associated with their roles as traders and hunters in the North American fur trade. Subgroups. The Cree are generally divided into 8 groups based on dialect and region. These divisions do not necessarily represent ethnic subdivisions within the larger ethnic group. Naskapi and Montagnais are inhabitants of an area they refer to as Nitassinan. Their territories comprise most of the present-day political jurisdictions of eastern Quebec and Labrador. Their cultures are differentiated, as the Naskapi are still caribou hunters and more nomadic than the Montagnais. But the Montagnais have more settlements. The total population of the two groups in 2003 was about 18,000 people, of which 15,000 lived in Quebec. Their dialects and languages are the most distinct from the Cree spoken by the groups west of Lake Superior. Atikamekw are inhabitants of the area they refer to as Nitaskinan, in the upper St. Maurice River Valley of Quebec. Their population is around 4,500. James Bay Cree, Grand Council of the Crees, approximately 18,000 Cree of Uischi and Nunavut regions of northern Quebec. Moose Cree, Moose Factory in the Cochrane District, Ontario. This group lives on Moose Factory Island, near the mouth of the Moose River, at the southern end of James Bay. Swampy Cree. This group lives in northern Manitoba along the Hudson Bay coast and adjacent inland areas to the south and west, and in Ontario along the coast of Hudson Bay and James Bay. Some also in eastern Saskatchewan around Cumberland House. It has 4,500 speakers. Woods Cree group in northern Alberta and Saskatchewan. Plains Cree 34,000 people in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, and Montana. Due to the many dialects of the Cree language, there is no modern collective autonym. The Plains Cree and Atikamekw refer to themselves using modern forms of the historical Nēhiraw, namely Nēhiraw and Nēhirawashi, respectively. Moose Cree, East Cree, Naskapi, and Montagnais all refer to themselves using modern dialectal forms of the historical Irineef, meaning man. Moose Cree use the form Milili, Coastal East Cree and Naskapi use Iyiyiw, Inland East Cree use Ineef, and Montagnais use Ilnu and Anu, depending on dialect. The Cree use Cree, Naskapi, or Montagnais to refer to their people only when speaking the languages of the European colonists, French or English. Political organization. Historical as hunter-gatherers, the basic unit of organization for Cree peoples were the lodge, a group of perhaps 8 or a dozen people, usually the families of 2 separate but related married couples, who lived together in the same wigwam or teepee, and the band, a group of lodges who moved and hunted together. In the case of disagreement, lodges could leave bands, and bands could be formed and dissolved with relative ease, but as there is safety in numbers, all families would want to be part of some band, and banishment was considered a very serious punishment. Bands would usually have strong ties to their neighbors through intermarriage and would assemble together at different parts of the year to hunt and socialize together. Besides these regional gatherings, there was no higher-level formal structure. Decisions of war and peace were made by consensus, with allied bands meeting together in council. People could be identified by their clan, which is a group of people claiming descent from the same common ancestor. Each clan would have a representative and a vote in all important councils held by the band. Each band remained independent of each other. However, Cree-speaking bands tended to work together and with their neighbors against outside enemies. Those Cree who moved onto the Great Plains and adopted bison hunting, called the Plains Cree, were allied with the Assiniboine and the Sioux in what was known as the Iron Confederacy, which was a major force in the North American fur trade from the 1730s to the 1870s. When a band went to war, they would nominate a temporary military commander, called a Rokimakan, loosely translated as war chief. This office was different from that of the peace chief, a leader who had a role more like that of diplomat. In the run-up to the 1885 Northwest Rebellion, Big Bear was the leader of his band. But once the fighting started, Wandering Spirit became war leader. Contemporary, there have been several attempts to create a national political organization that would represent all Cree peoples, at least as far back as a 1994 gathering at the Opaskwayak Cree First Nation Reserve. Name. The name Cree is derived from the Algonquian language exonym Kiristino, which the Ojibwe used for tribes around Hudson Bay. The French colonists and explorers, who spelled the term Kalistanon, Kiristinon, Nisano, Crisano, and Cristino, used the term for numerous tribes which they encountered north of Lake Superior, in Manitoba, and west of there. The French used these terms to refer to various groups of peoples in Canada, some of which are now better distinguished as Seven Anishinaabe, who speak languages different from the Algonquin. Depending on the community, the Cree may call themselves by the following names: the Nēhiraw, Nēhiraw, and Nēhiraw, or Ininif, Ililif, Iynu, or Iyyu. These names are derived from the historical autonym Nēhiraw or from the historical autonym Ininif. Cree using the latter autonym tend to be those living in the territories of Quebec and Labrador. Language. The Cree language is the name for a group of closely related Algonquin languages spoken by approximately 117,000 people across Canada, from the Northwest Territories to Labrador. It is the most widely spoken Aboriginal language in Canada. The only region where Cree has official status is in the Northwest Territories, together with 8 other Aboriginal languages. The two major groups, Nēhiraw and Innu, speak a mutually intelligible Cree dialect continuum, which can be divided by many criteria. In a dialect continuum, it is not so much a language, as a chain of dialects, where speakers from one community can very easily understand their neighbors. But a Plains Cree speaker from Alberta would find a Quebec Cree speaker difficult to speak to without practice. One major division between the groups is that the Eastern group palatalizes the sound K to either ts or to t when it precedes front vowels. There is also a major difference in grammatical vocabulary between the groups. Within both groups, another set of variations has arisen around the pronunciation of the Proto-Algonquin phoneme *l, which can be realized as l, r, y, n, or th by different groups. Yet in other dialects, the distinction between e and I has been lost, merging to the latter. In more Western dialects, the distinction between per second and has been lost, both merging to the former. Victor Golim lists Cree in the Encyclopedia of the World's Endangered Languages as one of 55 languages that have more than 1,000 speakers, which are being actively acquired by children. Identity and ethnicity. In Canada, the Cree are the largest group of First Nations in Canada, with 220,000 members and 135 registered bands. This large population may be a result of the Cree's traditional openness to intertribal marriage. Together, their reserve lands are the largest of any First Nations group in the country. The largest Cree band and the second largest First Nations band in Canada after the Six Nations Iroquois is the Lac La Ronge Band in northern Saskatchewan. Given the traditional Cree acceptance of mixed marriages, it is acknowledged by academics that all bands are ultimately of mixed heritage and multilingualism and multiculturalism was the norm. In the West, mixed bands of Cree, Sioux and Assiniboine, all partners in the Iron Confederacy, are the norm. However, in recent years, As indigenous languages have declined across Western Canada where there were once 3 languages spoken on a given reserve, there may now only be 1. This has led to a simplification of identity, and it has become fashionable for bands in many parts of Saskatchewan to identify as Plains Cree, at the expense of a mixed Cree-Saulteaux history. There is also a tendency for bands to recategorize themselves as Plains Cree, instead of Woods Cree or Swampy Cree. Neil MacLeod argues this is partly due to the dominant culture's fascination with Plains Indian culture as well as the greater degree of written standardization and prestige Plains Cree enjoys over other Cree dialects. The Nēhiraw are people of mixed ancestry, such as Nēhiraw and French, English, or Scottish heritage. According to Aboriginal Affairs and Northern Development Canada, the Nēhiraw were historically the children of French fur traders and Nēhiraw women or from unions of English or Scottish traders and Northern Dene women. Generally in academic circles, the term Nēhiraw can be used to refer to any combination of persons of mixed Native American and European heritage. Although historical definitions for Nēhiraw remain, Canada's Indian and Northern Affairs broadly define Nēhiraw as those persons of mixed First Nation and European ancestry, while the Nēhiraw's National Council defines a Nēhiraw as a person who self-identifies as Nēhiraw, is distinct from other Aboriginal peoples, is of historic Nēhiraw Nation ancestry and who is accepted by the Nēhiraw Nation group of Crees. Cree Indian, Chief King of the Wind, Chief Thundercloud, Chief Duck Hunter, Nēhiraw Girl. In the United States at one time the Cree lived in northern Minnesota, North Dakota and Montana. Today American Cree are enrolled in the federally recognized Chippewa Cree tribe, located on the Rocky Boy Indian Reservation, and in minority as Landless Cree, on the Fort Peck Indian Reservation and as Landless Cree, and Rocky Boy Cree, on the Fort Belknap Indian Reservation, all in Montana. The Chippewa Cree share the reservation with the Pembina Band of Chippewa Indians, who form the Chippewa half of the Chippewa Cree tribe. On the other reservations, the Cree minority share the reservation with the Assiniboine, Gros Ventre and Sault tribes. Traditionally, the southern limits of the Cree territory in Montana were the Missouri River and the Milk River. First Nation communities. Ethnobotany. The Hudson Bay Cree use a decoction of the leaves of Kalmia latifolia for diarrhea, but they consider the plant to be poisonous.